Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for coming to Center for Development Research here at University of Bonn. I'm Joachim von Braun, the Director of the Center for Development Research. We are very pleased to have you from the agriculture-related media in full force here at our center. The Center for Development Research, abbreviated ZEF, was started in the late 1990s. It's an international research institute. We are about 150 junior and senior researchers from all over the world. Many of our researchers focus on the topic which we debate with you today: sustainability of global agriculture. A challenge. Our type of research is not just done here in Bonn, but on the ground, engaging farmers and rural consumers and rural producers, policymakers. Many of our researchers are from Africa and Asia, but also some from Latin America, but of course also some from Germany and other non-European hemispheres. The Sustainable Development Goals have, after a lot of deliberations, identified in the goal number 2 the importance of promoting sustainable agriculture as one of the key issues to reach sustainability in the global economy and for poor people. There is a target enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals which argues by 2030, less than 15 years, ensure sustainable production systems and implement resilient agricultural practices that increase productivity and production, that help maintain ecosystems, that strengthen capacity for adaptation to climate change. We will talk about that also on the panel. Extreme weather, drought, flooding, and other disasters, and that progressively improve land and soil quality. And we will also touch on that in our panel, which I will introduce in a moment. The Sustainable Development Goals are a package of 17 goals. They cannot be separated from each other. They are a package. They are producing, hopefully, synergies, ending poverty, ending hunger and malnutrition of all kinds, reducing child mortality, improving education, and so on. I don't want to go through the litany. We at ZEF believe that these goals can only be achieved if we have a heavy investment in science, in research, and innovation. And we will talk about that on the panel as well. Sustainable agriculture is not only related to production systems, it relates to whole value chains, consumer health and consumer well-being, and we will also talk about that. At the center of sustainable agriculture systems are, of course, farmers. The world farming community, if we take a global perspective, the large majority manage very small farms. But a lot of transformation is happening there on the farm, on the about 450 million small farms which the world has, and their families. Unfortunately, among those more than 450 million small farms are also many of the malnourished and undernourished. A paradox. which we need to address on our panel as well. Let me briefly introduce our panelists, who I have asked to address in their presentations. They have initially 5 minutes each. Then maybe some questions between them, among them. And then we want to engage you. I have asked them to keep in mind the following guiding questions for this event. First, what do you recommend as sustainable solutions for agriculture? What are key elements of those solutions? Do they differ by industrialized and low-income countries? And secondly, thinking of your interest in the audience, how to communicate these solutions to farmers, business and consumers and policymakers. How to communicate. We want to focus our discussion with you also on your field of expertise in the audience, facilitating communication with the general public about the complex, partly technical issues, many of which are controversial, how to communicate solutions for sustainable agriculture. Then we introduce our panel, simply starting here from your view on the left. Ignace Coussement is Managing Director of AgriCord, an international alliance of agri-agencies. He is from Leuven, Belgium. Ignace, you will say a few words about AgriCord. That is an organization founded by farmers' organizations. On his left is Katia Simeonova. She is the manager of the MDA program, Review Methods and Training of the United Nations Climate Change Agency, the UNFCCC secretariat here in Bonn. Colleagues, you have probably by now realized that you are in a United Nations city in Bonn. It's not only former capital of Germany, but there are also 17 large and small secretariats of the United Nations by now residing here in Bonn, and the UNFCCC, I believe, is the biggest one of them. I don't want to say, not to offend anyone, the most important one, but I personally believe so. Brigitte Petersen is a professor at the Bonn University Agriculture Faculty and head of Department of Preventive Health Management. And Justice Tambo is a senior researcher from Ghana here at Center for Development Research. Justice research is on innovation in smallholder farming. And last not least, Oliver Kirui from Kenya is also a senior researcher here at ZEF. His research focuses on sustainable land use. I would like to ask the two speakers who entertain us with some brief PowerPoint presentations speak first, and then we go through the line. Brigitte, would you start first and introduce your thoughts to us? Thank you, and please welcome the panel with a warm applause.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizers to be invited, and I will give you my statement according to the two questions. First, I'm not only a professor at University of Bonn. I have several other functions. One function is that I'm the chairwoman of the International Food Net Center at the University of Bonn It's a center of interdisciplinary research and education via several faculties of our university. Then I'm responsible for the research and education agenda in the management board of a cluster, the Bonn Reales cluster, and its public-private partnership network located in the region of Bonn. And last but not least, I'm the chairwoman in the management board of a European Qualification Alliance. We established this alliance last year. And according to my functions, I define two key elements. The first, establishing national public-private partnership networks, and the second, combining education, research, and innovation as three sides of a knowledge triangle. That's my statement for the first question. Because behind this statement there are specific challenges. On one side, according to the World Health Organization, the deaths of an estimated 2 million people annually is linked to unsafe food. The second, antimicrobial resistance is a global public health concern, and animal health is of utmost importance for human health, animal welfare, resource efficiency of production, safeguarding the trade in animals and animal products. Therefore, reinforcing interdisciplinary research within the meaning of One Health approach is one solution in this field. And with all our networks located here in Bonn, we have a specific definition what means One Health. It means the integrative management of health risk and the simultaneous treatment of 5 aspects or components and pillars. The health of human beings, the health of animals and plants, environmental protection of soil, water and air, and food safety and international trading. The second question was, is there a different strategy or approach between industrialized or low-income countries? And I think it isn't, because we all have a joint agenda, a global agenda with 17 global goals, and in the International Food Net Center of University Bonn, we are focusing on 5 of these global goals. The good health and well-being of humans and animals, the quality of education, the clean water and the infrastructure, not only in industrialized countries, but in low-income countries too, and the responsible use of products and consumption of products. And we combine these 5 goals in 3 research groups: the One Health focus group, the food waste focus group, and the focus group responsible system innovation. how to communicate the results of our research and the impact of our interdisciplinary research. I think you are the main group who can communicate it to the target groups, farmers, business, and consumers. And therefore, I think there are two ways to do it. On one side, by presenting and discussing white papers with key areas and priority topics for European research support. We have done it via the Animal Task Force as one network on the European level, and one key activity is healthy livestock and healthy people. And by organizing and arranging international congresses with a high public visibility, and we are planning it for in 2 years, conference and international worldwide conference, food safety and human health, and feel invited and save the date in 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Brigitte. We all remember about 10 years ago, days of bird flu. Is the world better prepared now to deal with these types of issues? Would planes stop again and journalists couldn't fly? And so are we better prepared?
Yes, we are.
In what way?
Yes, on one side, here in Bonn, we have an international database hosted by one of our institutes from our government. It's the GIS8 database, and in this database, all monitoring results worldwide are stored, and from this data, specific European cost action, it's called One Health action. They use this data for new research approaches and new international research. I think we are prepared. We are developing new prognosis models, what we can do, and we have new ways to manage crisis. We have a specific education field in crisis management, and the network EQA has several courses in this direction. And I think here in Bonn we have a coordinating function with all these activities.
Thank you. That sounds reassuring. Will still be a problem, I believe, to identify infected chicken in the African Rift Valley, which probably don't enter databases so easily, and that's where working with farmers will be critical. Katia Simeonova, your turn, please.
Good morning, everybody. Once again, my name is Katia Simeonova. I'm working with the Climate Change Secretariat here in Bonn, in Germany. And it's a pleasure for me to be with you today and to speak about agriculture in a broader context of climate change. So my presentation will be rather framing presentation than zooming into specific policy and solutions, but hopefully by framing the broader issues of agriculture in climate change context, we can see better challenges and opportunities for identifying such solutions. Yes. And let me start first with the objective of the Climate Convention, which is enshrined in Article 2. By agreeing on the objective of the Convention, parties to the Climate Convention essentially agreed to join their efforts in stabilizing concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at the levels that would prevent dangerous interference with climate systems, to ensure sufficient time for various systems to adapt to the changes, but also to ensure that food production is not threatened. So agriculture, without being mentioned explicitly, is deeply enshrined in the objective of the Convention. Then you have heard about the Kyoto Protocol. Everybody knows about the Kyoto Protocol, which was negotiated in '97. And agriculture is one among the sectors which are covered by the quantified economy-wide emission reduction targets, which have been assumed by developed countries under the Kyoto Protocol. And most importantly, you are also aware of the Paris Agreement, which was concluded in December last year, which not only confirmed the ultimate objective of the Convention, but also strengthened it, in particular by recognizing the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger. Within the climate process, there are two fundamental responses to climate change, and they are equally important for agriculture. This is mitigation to climate change and adaptation to climate change. When we speak about mitigation, it's important to see the broader picture. What are the options and opportunities provided by different sectors and areas? And you can see in my next chart that agriculture, together with forestry, which is dealt with in a holistic way in climate change context as a land use issue, provides quite significant potential for emission saving, which is estimated between 2.4 to 8.5 gigaton a year by 2020. Or altogether, this is almost half of the total potential for emission saving worldwide. What this does mean also in terms of contribution of the agricultural sector of emissions, this is essentially the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IFAJ, that estimated that in 2010, agriculture accounted for 10 to 12% of global GHG emissions, with understanding that the bulk of these emissions comes from enteric fermentation and soils, followed by paddy rice cultivation and biomass burning. One of the reasons for the success of the Paris Agreement was the submission by parties to the Convention of the so-called intended nationally determined contributions, very complicated term, which is also known as INDCs. Practically all parties submitted such INDCs in the lead up to Paris, and few of them submitted after Paris. So altogether, we have 189 parties which communicated their INDCs under the Paris Agreement, and out of them, 98 parties included mitigation component in agriculture and forestry sector, which signals national determination to undertake action in these important sectors of economy. Keeping in mind, of course, different national circumstances and different development priorities. And here is the quite nuanced way to start addressing the important question of whether there are similarities or differences between developed and developing countries. Despite variety of actions or sustainable development solutions proposed by parties in their INDCs, there are some common patterns, and they are in a way summarized in my last point, which suggests that any solution, in particular sustainable development solution in agriculture, will need to take all the aspects of climate change in a holistic way. So it's not either mitigation or adaptation, but it's mitigation and adaptation altogether taken as a package in order to be sustainable. Such solutions need to address definitely productivity and diversity of agricultural systems and take into account differences in scale and case and site-specific conditions. And in the same time, such solutions need to address important priorities of rural development and sustainable development. Now moving to the second response to climate change, which is adaptation. The Convention recognizes adaptation as an important response in all sectors, but it's particularly important for agriculture, which is in a way also the sector which is among the most vulnerable sectors to climate change. And this is why we have seen a number of institutions, programs and initiatives put in place in order to address adaptation to climate change, including agriculture. I would like only to mention a few of them: Adaptation Committee, least developed countries expert groups, again the question of differences between developed and developing countries, and creating dedicated structure to facilitate policy responses by specific groups of developing countries, and Nairobi Work Program on Impact, Vulnerability and Adaptation. There is also an important process of formulating of national adaptation plans, or so-called NAPs, again for developing countries, that are quite important as they provide an opportunity to support the alignment of adaptation with the sustainable development priorities of these countries, and in the same time assist countries in articulating and addressing their adaptation needs, including in the area of agriculture and food security. Going back to submission of INDCs, 137 parties to the Convention included adaptation component in their INDCs, and in most cases this adaptation component was linked to agriculture. The picture of the institutional framework under the UNFCCC will not be complete if we don't mention the technology mechanism and its two arms. Its policy arm, which is the Technology Executive Committee, and its implementation arm, which is the Climate Technology Center and Network, or CTCN. An important activity which is undertaken by the Technology Executive Committee is the so-called Technology Needs Assessment. And according to this assessment, agriculture sector is among the most important and frequently prioritized sector in developing countries in terms of need for facilitation of technology development and transfer. Then one of the services that is provided by the CTCN is to provide technical assistance to developing countries, and in many cases this technical assistance is defined by this technology needs assessment. So what is important in this case that the priorities are country driven. They are defined by countries themselves and not imposed from outside. I wanted also to highlight in this context that the CTCN has received so far more than 100 such requests for facilitation and assistance, and more than 20% of them are linked to agriculture and technical assistance in this sector. In concluded, I wanted to highlight that the Climate Convention is not only international law that regulates international relations with regard to climate change, but it's also a platform for international cooperation and also a platform to catalyze action on the ground, including, again, both aspects, mitigation and adaptation. And this is action by all institutions which are engaged in the sustainable development, including UN institutions, multilateral agencies, and development financial institutions. You don't need to read all the elements of my chart, which is shown on the screen, but essentially what I wanted to highlight through this chart, which comes from, again, from the IPCC, is that all these institutions essentially are acting on three different levels, which is international level, national level, and also subnational levels. In concluding, I wanted to highlight that success in any sustainable development solutions in agriculture depends, on my view, on the ability at different entities at the national and international level to handle agriculture in a holistic way by looking in a comprehensive, scientifically sound way at two aspects of climate change important for agriculture, which is mitigation and adaptation. In the same time, success in sustainable solutions for global agriculture can depend to a very high degree on high-level commitment by the governments, cross-cutting facilitation and cooperation at all levels, engagement of broad range of stakeholders, and this is why it's very encouraging that here we have representatives of different partnerships engaging both governments and private sector, and also implementing a wide range of policies and measures that in many cases go, strictly speaking, beyond the narrow boundaries of the agricultural sector. This is all that I wanted to share with you at my introductory remarks, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions and engage in further discussion in this exciting panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, dear guests, it's certainly exciting what all happened after the excitement in Paris at the so-called COP21. We have learned that agriculture is part of the problem of greenhouse gas emissions, actually a very significant part of it. But agriculture is also very much on the line, and farming people are suffering from climate change already, and increasingly so in the future. And you have seen that the global community has set up institutional infrastructure to address these issues. I think that's very encouraging. Katia, how are farmer organizations or farmers in all these committees?
One of the most fascinating developments in negotiations leading to the Paris conference was that in addition to negotiating the text of the agreement, there was quite a large scale of engagement of all various stakeholders, including governments, subnational authorities, representatives of businesses, farmer community, green NGOs, and so on, in the so-called process of which came initially from the United Nations level, Lima Paris Action Agenda. And there were a number of initiatives that were either launched or strengthened as a result of the Paris process. We as a secretariat prepared a summary for policymakers for Paris. It is available on the web. You can easily find the link. And there is an extensive section on agriculture where a number of initiatives and partnerships, including those engaging farmers, are outlined. But this is just a snapshot of what we have seen in the lead up to Paris. And since Paris, we have seen a number of new initiatives, and I hope that we will see much broader engagement and involvement by farmers, in particular on issues of agriculture, because, as I have mentioned, success in any sustainable solutions in agriculture will depend, one of the components of success is broader engagement of all stakeholders, importantly farmers. And in this context also, the issue of communication is of critical importance, and this is your role, and maybe we can engage a little bit later on with some ideas and suggestions how to do things differently and how to do things better.
Thank you. Great. Well, the long-run vision, we hope, and we need to work on the institutional and technological innovations for that, is a greenhouse gas neutral world agriculture. That's a long shot, we know that, but that should be the aim. And agriculture has the potentials if we factor in carbon sequestration in soils and not just with biomass. Anyway, I don't want to become too technical. Speaking of farmer organizations, Ignace Coussement, you have the floor, please.
Is there a microphone here?
It's on. It's this one.
No. Good morning, I'm sorry. Ms. Simeonova, Katia, if you allow, already gave the best possible introduction in her last statement on the point I want to make in my contribution. It's about farmer organizations. And I would like to invite you in my short introduction to take this point of view of farmers and farmer organizations looking at this big issue of sustainable agriculture. That's the purpose of my intervention. And taking it, as the chair has asked, from a global perspective. So what can farmers think? What can farmers do? What can be their ambition in this huge thing of a future and a sustainable future in agriculture? One of the best attitudes for that, I think, is to imagine what we could say to young farmers in this world, because their concern is to have a future in the next 10, 20 years. So taking the point of view of what could we tell young farmers at this moment and how they can see their own future, what are their constraints, what can be their ambition. That's a bit the point of view I will take. I'm not speaking on behalf of myself. I happen to be something like a privileged witness of what happens at the global farmers world. AgriCord is a global network. We are dealing with approximately 200 to 300 farmer organizations, agricultural cooperatives, agro-businesses on a cooperative basis all over the world in more than 60 countries. It's an international network of which Germany is a member. That means AgriCord is a development agency. Means we are only dealing with the business of supporting farmer organizations, strengthening farmer organizations from Germany, from Belgium, from France, from Canada. Well, more than 12 countries, and indirectly 15 countries are involved in that. So that gives me the background for my contribution. Just what does this mean in practice? Yesterday and this afternoon, even in Brussels, AgriCord is talking with the Pan-African Farmer Organization, PAFO, and its 5 members, of which the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions, EAF, Eastern African Farmers Federation, the West African Farmers. And what are they dealing with? Well, the subject is, and it's the subject of a development briefing this morning for ACP countries in Brussels, is about smart agriculture, is about big data, is about precision farming for smallholders. That sets a bit the framework in which a Pan-African farmer organization, representative for smallholder and family farmers, is looking at its own future. So this, people are talking about serious things, even for smallholders, and it's a multi-stakeholder setting. That means that, for instance, the European representatives of machinery producers are also involved in that, and this whole critical discussion on what is agriculture's future. Is it manual agriculture? Is it animal draught? Is it machinery? What is precision farming? What can it mean for smallholders? This is the topic of the moment. Just the farmers' world is indeed a very diverse world, as you know. I don't have a big slide, but the small logo of AgriCord that you can see here is a circle, and it says since 10 years that 75% of farmers in this world, for them farming is a manual thing. 25% of farming is with animal draught. And we could talk about the 2% that are too small to be on a logo like that. The 2% is dealing with agricultural machinery and mechanic farming. So let's not forget that. That's the reality of farming. I have 3 points in trying to see how can young farmers look at sustainable agriculture. The first message is about competitiveness. The second is about off-farm activities. And the third is about rural transformation. The first thing is that young farmers, looking at their future, should be very much aware that they are and they have to be competitive. There's no alternative for competitiveness in agriculture. All farmers are competitors, very often have similar interests, but very often have competing interests. And that's the reality. So looking at farming means that you have to be better than others to be productive, to earn a decent income. And that is for smallholders as well as for the big farms. They also have to be aware that, and they are aware, that being competitive very often and nearly always will mean that as a smallholder, as family farming, you will have to compete and to be in an environment where smallholders and small farms work in the same markets as major farms. So the industrial agriculture will be there, and family farming will always be there with industrial farming. That is an essential element in the economic environment of young farmers. The role of farmer organizations there is a very important one. It is making sure that the interest where farmers can do through strength in numbers, through collective action, where they can defend their interest, well, competitiveness should be supported by the farmer organizations. The big farmers, the industrial farmers, are not in farmer organizations. They don't need that. Farmer organizations are with the medium-sized and smallholder farmers, and that they are the ones that can rely messages of innovation, messages of quality improvement, messages at producing at lower costs, everything that can contribute to competitiveness. The second message is about off-farm activities. Young farmers are looking, and they are looking more and more beyond their pure productive activity. They are looking beyond their own animals, their own crops, their own fields, their own trees. They're looking at the input side, and they are looking at the marketing side, and that's a necessity. There's a lot that is going on through collective action, through cooperative settings where smaller farmers can get grip on the reality at the input side, including financial services, including access to finance, including access to land, as well as to at the output side, where we have this very important issues like contract farming, outgrower schemes, dealing with processes, making sure that not only you're strong in your own productive environment, but get grip on what happens before, get grip on what happens beyond. There will be no sustainable future for agriculture if farmers do not control these both levels of their organizations. And the history of farmer organizations all over the world is one of getting grip on those realities. The third point is about rural transformation. There's something like a reality in this world that indeed developing countries, least developed countries, 50–60% of the rural population, is farming. Subsistence farming, call it whatever name you want, rural world 1 or rural world, not only living on subsistence but partly marketing and so on. The reality is that there is a process of shifting from the primary sector to the industrial sector to the service sector. The reality is that this pressure is going on, urbanization is going on, new consumer levels are becoming important for farmers, and that this clearly, the reality is there is no future for all current farmers in farming in the world. It's sad to say if you're coming from the farmers' world, but it's a reality. So young farmers should look beyond farming, even say, let's get prepared to get another job out of farming. Let's look at this input side and this output side. Let's look into processing. Let's look into whatever can happen to make sure that we have a living. And the reality is that not all of these smallholder farmers will find a living in farming. The role of farmer organization is then, again, a very important one. It's one of public services. It's one of being there to create new job opportunities, to be open, to involve government, to make sure that social networks are operating also, and that this process of rural transformation can happen in the best possible way. So these are the 3 points from a young farmer's point of view, and in terms of sustainability I would like to make. It's about being competitive and being very much aware of that competitiveness and improvement of quality is a priority, looking at off-farm activities and being aware that we are in an inevitable process of rural transformation that will be part of this future world in agriculture. Talking about communication then, I must say I'm very happy to be in an environment of the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists with Jacques van Utrieve. Some years ago we were involved in setting up this organization, and I'm very happy that this group of people can meet at a global level. I think you should be aware that your role is a very important one, and that the farmers' world is in need of a much stronger communication effort than is what's available now. This needs to grow. There are two attitudes that farmer organizations need, and where you can play a role, and that are related to communication. The first is that the farmers' world must avoid and leave attitudes, drop attitudes that can be called corporatist or corporativist. Let's forget about this thing about we defend our thing. We don't defend our thing, we defend the global challenge of a society where interests of producers should always be brought in a context of interest of producers and consumers. The attitude of farmers be complaining and farmers coming into the news when something is going wrong and prices are this, prices are that, they are low, they are high, they are volatile, they are whatever. The message that the farmers will need in society is a message of general interest. That's one of the most important things. Another issue that regularly comes up among farmer organizations, and that's a huge change in the recent 5 years, is that the multi-stakeholder setting is important. Okay, that's a very general statement, an easy statement. But it's not an easy statement for a farmer organization that normally has to deal with difficult governments, very often with governments in fragile states, in fragile situations. The attitude there has changed a lot. From complaining and from considering government as the enemy, farmer organizations do consider as being their task to make sure that government works. So farmer organizations and what we call line ministries, the ministries of economy, of agriculture, of rural transformation, of rural whatever in developing countries, these relations are very much important. So in terms of communication, I think that's a major step, that is a major development that is taking place, and in which, in terms of communication, we must be very careful about. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great points. Thank you, Ignace. Speaking of communication, let me ask you, how does the pervasive availability of smartphones and cell phones change your farmers' world, the farmers' world, and the organization of farmers as you look around? Isn't that completely changing your type of business?
It is in two aspects. The first aspect is that the use of smartphones, which obviously never needed a training or a training program or an extension program, obviously, but it has created in the farmers' world a sense of that we are capable of innovation. We can face this new world. It gives strength. It gives a feeling of indeed we can consult traders, and we can consult. We have market information. That's the first thing. The second thing is there are plenty of examples at this moment where very effective market information is shared. And it works. So this part of it is reality, but it also created a feeling of innovation is something that we can handle with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I was glad that you focused on young farmers. We have an ongoing research project on on young farmers in Ethiopia. Surveys done and asked them, what are your plans? You want to stay in farming? Young men, young women. And at least to my surprise, a very large share of young, dynamic people in rural Ethiopia want to build a career in farming. How come? We think that if you create a dynamic rural environment, I mean, we are talking about 50-60% who plan to stay in farming, not necessarily on their parents' or father's farm, but willing to move around in rural Ethiopia. If you create a vibrant, growth-oriented environment, which Ethiopia currently has, with agricultural growth rates between 6 and 10%, I mean Chinese-type growth rates, aspiration levels of youngsters are high, and then they look for opportunities, but many of them are part-time farmers already. They have already a job outside, and it was great that you touched on that in your presentation. Justice Tambo, please let us hear from you. You are in touch a lot with farmers and their inventiveness. Give us your thoughts.
Okay, so thank you. So I'll be addressing the issues from the point of view of innovation. So I'll look broadly at innovations, several aspects of innovations. So as a sort of background, so we all know that the world is undergoing several changes and challenges, and rapidly changing, and innovation is more than ever needed now than previously. And when you look at the estimations, you say that by 2050 the world population will be 9 billion people, so food production has to increase to be able to meet the demand. And this requires innovation. We are also facing challenges of climate change. We talk about population growth. We are also facing challenges of some global crises, like food price volatility, land degradation. So all these have to be solved, and innovation can play an essential role. And in agriculture, we have had previous experiences with success of innovations. We have heard of the Green Revolution, which occurs in some parts of Latin America, especially Mexico and Asia. So basically what it meant, there was a scientist called Namambola, maybe you have heard of his name. So he and his team developed semi-dwarf cereal varieties like wheat and rice. And in combination with irrigation, massive irrigation and fossil fuel fertilizer, they were able to save about 1 billion people from starvation. So through his efforts, he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1970. But there were some challenges with this green revolution. First, it led to the loss of biodiversity. It involved a lot of use of fertilizer, and we heard of the contribution of agriculture to climate change. So it's an emission of greenhouse gases, and fertilizer is one of the key emitters of greenhouse gases. And also there were issues about health. The green revolution involved high use of fertilizer and pesticide, which may have some impact on health. So we have to address this issue, so we cannot still use the green revolution approach. That's why we need sustainable solutions. So we need innovations that will help to address these issues. So I will focus on some of the innovations where I think they have potential to contribute to the sustainable solutions to global agriculture. And I've grouped the innovations. So the first one I'm going to talk about is seed and agronomic innovations. So basically seed is an essential input for agricultural production. You need to sow the seed before you apply other inputs. And we have several types of seed. So we have modern varieties, what we also call improved varieties. And the challenges when we look at the developing countries, adoption of these modern varieties is very high. But in some countries, about 100% of farmers are using modern varieties. When I talk of modern varieties, I mean hybrid, then improved open pollinated, and we also recently have GM seeds, which is a bit, we have to increase the public awareness of the GM seeds. Then, but if you look at developing countries, it ranges from 20 to 80% some countries are very low. I was looking at some data in Angola, like we mentioned, only 10% of farmers are using these modern varieties. So we have to encourage the adoption of this seed. And this seed should not be promoted as a package. Farmers are facing challenges of climate change. They also are facing challenges of nutrition. So you develop the seed, but statistics show that about 2 billion people are suffering from hidden hunger or malnutrition. So the seed, you have to incorporate nutrition elements into it. And conventional breeding can do it. So there are some varieties, like in maize, we have quality protein maize. Then in sweet potato, we have orange fresh sweet potato varieties. All this, we have incorporated the nutrition aspect into the seed. But we also need biotechnological innovations. These are modern technologies. We have modern innovations. So we can talk of tissue culture. We can talk of GM seeds I mentioned about. We also have marker-assisted selection. So all this can lead to the breeding of seeds, modern varieties of crops. And these modern varieties also contribute to the nutrition aspect. Like we cannot use only conventional approaches to add nutrition to the seed. So, for example, when you talk of this golden rice, this is high yielding and has some nutritional values. We talk of some crops that you have to add beta carotene. You need these modern technologies. Then after the seed, you have to add some agronomic practices, improve agronomic practices to achieve maximum yield. One of them is fertilizer. That's where the challenge comes in. As I mentioned, the Green Revolution, they use massive amounts of fertilizer to achieve their results. But now we have to go to sustainable ways. And if you look at the fertilizer also in developing countries, there's high use of fertilizer in developed countries. Sorry. So, for instance, in some of the countries, it's indicated that per hectare of farm, they use about 100 kilograms of fertilizer. But if you look at developing countries, the data shows it's only 9% fertilizer used per hectare. So we have to improve fertilizer uses among farmers in developing countries. And at the same time, looking at the optimal level of fertilizer. So fertilizer also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. So we need some approaches that will lead to a reduction in this fertilizer usage. So one of them is microdosing. So we have innovative ways of applying the fertilizer so that you don't lose it. So microdosing is just basically applying small quantity of fertilizer at the time of planting. So for instance, you use only about 4 kilograms of fertilizer for 1 hectare, which is like you reduce the cost of the fertilizer because you need only limited amount. So the 100 kilograms of fertilizer you need, you just apply it on the food and plant won't absorb or take all the nutrients from the fertilizer. So if you do targeted application, those are ways of like improving the crop yield, reducing the cost, and also mitigating the greenhouse gases. Then there are also some agroecological approaches, some innovations in the sustainable intensification ways, which we can also promote. This includes conservation agriculture or integrated soil fertility management. So we have to reduce the application of fertilizer. We have to encourage some people to increase the fertilizer usage, but also at the same time teaching them how to use it in an optimal way. Then another set of innovations which are very essential is institutional innovations. So we are trying to promote the adoption of these technical innovations that I mentioned, but we need some enabling environment. We need the policy makers to promote this. And there are several institutional innovations. Some of them have been mentioned already. So we have issues about providing infrastructure for the farmers. We have issues about subsidy. So most of these technologies are not being adopted because the farmers are very poor and they cannot afford it. So we need some innovative ways of disseminating and subsidizing the seeds or the fertilizers for the farmers. So there are several examples of the subsidy programs. So Nigeria introduced an innovative e-wallet system where they disseminate the fertilizer through voucher scheme that is transferred to the mobile phones of farmers, and they can use it to retrieve the fertilizers. So these are all innovative ways, institutional ways that we can use to disseminate information about the innovations to farmers. Then we talk about contract farming. These are all institutional innovations, connecting farmers to the market innovative ways. Then we also have informational innovations, which is quite modern. So here we are talking about ICT innovations or mobile phone innovations. So in the modern, in the industrialized countries, farmers are using mobile phone a lot. So now they are able to have some apps, some applications that's able to tell you, identify the weeds or the diseases in your plants. You're also able to record data about your crop yield, when to apply fertilizer or when to do several activities on the field. But in developing countries, the usage of these mobile phones, or we call it smart innovations, they are now increasing. We need to train farmers more in the usage of these modern technologies. Then another set of innovations I would like to talk about is farmers' innovation. So all these innovations I've described are innovations which are developed by maybe researchers or like scientists, and then we disseminate it to farmers. But some farmers are also equally innovative. They are facing several challenges and they are very creative, and they are come out with their own solutions. So when a farmer or a group of farmers come out to develop an innovation, we call it farmers innovation or bottom-up innovations. So we have to also motivate farmers to continue to develop these innovations. There are several examples of successful innovations developed by farmers. So for instance, you know the plow, the steel plow. It was developed by a farmer, John Deere, which is now very famous. A lot of people are using the steel plow to plow their land. We also have several local innovations developed by farmers. In Burkina Faso, there's a way of planting in pits. It's called Zai system, which is very famous throughout the world. It was developed by farmers. We also have several examples of our work at ZEF here from Ghana, and you see that farmers are very, very innovative. They have come out with solutions to the problems they face, and these are very sustainable solutions because the farmers, they don't have the resources, so they use their local resources, which like they have no negative environmental consequences. Yeah. So we have to also encourage farmers to innovate. Then how do we communicate all these innovations in the agricultural sectors to businesses and consumers and farmers? That's where innovation also plays a key role. I talk about informational innovations. So the use of ICT. We have now social media. Lots of people are using social media. There are several large-scale farmers, very literate farmers who knows how to use smartphones. So you go, they have a YouTube video where they explain their practices. My former office mate was telling me in Germany, some farmers have something they call Braun Wiki. So it's like a website where if you have any questions related to agriculture, you can just send it and the farmers will reply. So it's accessible by everybody. And we have some NGOs like Access Agriculture. They have several videos about agricultural practices, trying to teach farmers how to go about their businesses. Then we also have institutional innovations that we can use to disseminate the information. So I'll talk about innovation platforms. So innovation platform is basically a physical or virtual network of stakeholders who come together to diagnose some problems in agriculture and try to find solution to it. So basically it involves farmers, scientists, researchers, business and consumers. It also involves traders, processors. So they come together to try to find solutions. And probably we should also think of including journalists to this innovation platform. So it involves stakeholders, but some stakeholders are missing in it. So if you include those who can communicate the information from the innovation platforms to those who don't participate in the innovation platform, will have some results. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Justice. Justice, you have organized innovation contests in Ghana, and the winning farmer got a heavy motorbike. How were these winners selected, and what did they invent? Can you give us just one example? You can speak from...
Can I show
Picture.
a slide?
Do you want give a slide? Yeah.
Yeah. What's?
Oh.
Yes. Yes. So, as I said, we took that farmers are very innovative, and we should encourage them. And we try to identify the innovations they have developed. So one of the approaches we use is innovation contest, which is a competition for farmers who have developed some innovation to apply, and they can win prices. Yeah, so we did it in Ghana for 3 years, and we are now even replicating it in other countries. So this is one of some of the winners of the awards. This was the first prize winner in 2012. So he has found a way of storing onion seeds using a local plant called barracoon. So you know, onion, I mentioned seed in my initial presentation. Farmers normally don't have money to be purchasing seed every year, so they store seeds from their previous harvest, and onion is one of the difficult seeds to store because it gets rotten, and he has found a way of storing it, and the germination potential is even about 90% even after storing it for 3 years using this plant. So he harvests this plant from the bush and pulverizes it to get this powdery form, and then he places them in bottles. Then you can put the onion seed in it. So you go to his house, you have a shelf full of bottles with this plant. Then the seed, the viability remains the same for several years. So that's the innovation he developed. We have several examples. So this is another farmer who has found a way of controlling this parasitic weed called striga. So striga, when it appears on your farm, it's like a parasitic weed. It sucks the nutrient from your plants and you get very low yield. And he found out that you can use onion leaves to suppress the emergence of the striga on your farm. So farmers have several innovations. We have to motivate them to develop these innovations and also share with other farmers. And this is some of the activities we are doing at ZEF here. Thank you.
Excellent. Colleagues, let me briefly inform you in between. One of the largest new investment initiatives by the German government in the development sphere is investment in agriculture. The German Ministry for Development, for Economic Cooperation and Development, the so-called BMZ, has mobilized in the last 3 years more than an extra 1 billion euros a year. And the key component in that program is investment in innovation centers in 12 African countries and in India. An excellent initiative, I can say so because our institute accompanies this investment initiative with research and together with our African colleagues. Oliver Kirui, last not least.
Thank you so much. Speaking last is always the best because then your colleagues have already said most of the things you wanted to say and you just have to tie the loose ends and complete the speech. I've been working on one of the key projects here at our institute at Center for Development Research on the economics of land degradation and sustainable land management and poverty, which was, I focused on the Eastern African region and a few other countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, but the project was actually a global project looking at different places and different areas. So I'll give some of the reflections based on our study, but also try to look into the more general issues about what could be done and to sustainably, improve or manage our agricultural system in the coming years. Colleagues, the primary objective of agriculture, which cannot be compromised, is to produce adequate and what I say nutritious food to sustainably feed about 9 to 10 billion people by the year 2050. And as a matter of fact, agriculture is the largest user of terrestrial land area, using about one third of the land area, and also using vast amounts of water. And in this case, then agriculture plays a very critical role in our world today and in our sustainable development agenda post 2015. And I would really wish to say that the unique opportunity to eradicate poverty, hunger, and malnutrition in our generation, and also to make agriculture and the food system more sustainable, must not be missed. And this can be done, and this can be achieved through different avenues, as my colleagues and the first presenters have already said. And today, perhaps some of the most critical challenges and issues that the world is facing is issues of nutrition, hunger, poverty, and nutritional issues. But, and all these centers around agriculture. And beyond this also, there are new and emerging challenges that the agricultural sector continues to face. And some of these include, for instance, how do we make sure that we don't run out of water in the coming decades, in the coming years? And how do we improve and preserve the soil and our biodiversity? The other aspect is how do we adapt to climatic extremes, which is also a serious factor facing our agricultural production systems today. And what is the best future for smallholder farmers, as already mentioned, and about the young farmer? What is the best future for this? What is the best solution for the future of smallholder farming in agriculture, especially in developing countries? The other aspect, which is more imminent and urgent now, is how do we create better and high-paying jobs for the young people who are, or the rural youth who are really making a living out of the rural areas? And the last but not least, how do we ensure that there is healthier foods and good diet in our systems today? I will focus briefly on three aspects or key elements that I call the elements of sustainable solutions for agriculture. And the first one is sustainable agricultural intensification. There is what I call a consensus emerging from the research community and also from development practitioners that addressing some of these challenges will require a shift in our agricultural system into a more sustainable agricultural intensification, both for the small and large-scale farms throughout the world. And the key principles of sustainable agricultural intensification, therefore, is to ensure that there is sustainable, there is sufficient, and there is nutritious food coming from our agricultural system, and also ensuring that as we continue doing this production or these kinds of production system, we have an enabling environment for economic and social development in the rural areas as well. And we need to treat also people, treat animals, and treat the environment with respect. And through this, Justice already mentioned quite a number of the issues that will ensure that there is sustainable agricultural intensification. In this case, we are talking about production of good food, not just enough food, but also food of nutritious quality. And in this case, we are talking about biofortification, we are talking about improved varieties that are resilient to the environment, resilient to the climatic changes. And we're also talking about productivity increases in the animal sector and in the animal subsector as well. And doing this will require a lot in terms of science, technology, and innovations. I like saying that science and technology and innovations together would make farms smart farms, and also making farmers intelligent farmers. We need all this to shift the new frontier in our production system and in our nutritional systems as well. And we also have to ensure that there is resilient food systems and reduction in environmental impact. Recently, the study that we conducted here at our institute showed that globally we are losing close to about $300 billion annually as a result of land use, land cover change. And this is basically loss of ecosystem services by conversion of, say, grasslands into cropland, or conversion of forest into croplands alone. And in this case, the global community is losing close to $300 billion annually. And the drivers, or some of the key driving forces to this, are what we normally call the underlying factors. And these are poverty, and the other aspect is unsustainable land management practices. And to address all this, then we need a more concerted effort and more coming together and working on these aspects and ensuring that farmers have good livelihoods, they have good production systems, but also we have the best and the good policies that will enable the production systems to continue. And the second aspect that I want to talk about is what I call climate smart agriculture. Climate smart agriculture is a continuous process of improving the agriculture and innovations in policies, in technologies, and also in management and in financing. It is important to have this concept of climate smart agriculture today because it will ensure that there is sustained increases in both agricultural productivity and incomes, but also it will strengthen the adaptive capacity and resilience of the people and the food systems. And furthermore, it will also, climate smart agriculture will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is good for our environment. And finally, last but not least, I will talk about increased investments and having the right policies. This would be my third element. There is need to have a coordinated action in order to have sustained investment in agriculture and rural development. Our countries in the developing world must give more effort and more resources and more time and more attention to the agricultural and the rural sector. Not because it is good for votes, not because it is only good, to talk and get masses of people supporting you, but because we have the right attitude and the right desire to see development in the rural areas, and also to make sure that we have a healthy population that is producing healthy food for the world. I would say that the change in policies and progressive investment, especially in capacity building and also in extension and vocational training, is needed in the rural areas in developing countries. There is also need to strengthen the public research and development, and also investment in what I say human resources and institutional change. Justice already mentioned about that. And also when you talk about farm organization, we're talking about organizational and as well institutional changes that we need to ensure that there is progressive change in the rural areas and development in the rural areas. And finally, on communication, I cannot belabor the points that my colleagues have also mentioned. I would stress on the fact that we need to harness the great potential that is coming with the ICT revolution in the developing countries. Now the smartphone or the mobile phones is everywhere in the rural areas in Africa and in Latin America and Southeast Asia. We can use these tools to reach farmers. We can use these tools to provide information that is needed by farmers. We can use these tools to provide the right solution to pests and to pest invasion in our fields and so forth. The other point on communication is that we need to re-engineer and I also say reorient our agricultural extension services. If you move across the developing world, the agricultural extension system is on the decline and actually is really not working. We need to sort of rethink the extension system in our countries and in these regions of the world that require more serious and more financing and more people working there. The last point is capacity building and vocational training of the farmers. Farmers will require proper training and most of them, the uneducated farmers, will require more vocational training to be able to understand, to use technologies, and also to understand, to communicate with policymakers and communicate with also the research fraternity and so forth. With this, I say that it is possible to address the challenges of post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Oliver. Oliver, you threw a figure of more than 300 billion against this audience. I think they deserve a bit of explanation. Oliver, you have mapped the world, and you and your colleagues, in 500,000 pixeled observation points from a satellite perspective. And then what? How did you come to these 300 billion?
Right. The first step in our assessment of the land degradation in the global community was, first of all, to identify areas that are experiencing degradation and areas also that are experiencing land improvement. And in this case, we are using biomass and the biomass productivity over the period of 1982 to 2006. And in this case, we're looking at areas that between these time periods, there is either a decline or an increase in biomass harvested in these areas. And we're analyzing at pixel level of 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers, and our analysis showed that actually the land degradation hotspots cover about 30% of our land area today. And in these areas, the basic concept or the basic causes of degradation was from land use, land cover change. And when we looked into these particular aspects, then we are able to value the ecosystem services that come with the value of ecosystem services loss that come with land use, land cover change. And when we accumulate this over the different pixels, then we are able to get, using the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Framework that was proposed by UNFCCC in 2005, we are able to value every single ecosystem service that we are losing over this period of time. And this is when we come to a very conservative figure of $300 billion annually over a period of 8 years. And these are conservative figures because we don't look into some specific aspects, for instance, salinity, which is serious. We also look into aspects like soil erosion, loss of soil erosion itself, which is also massive. And we don't also look at offside costs, for instance, siltation of dams and many other things. So in a summary, this is how we do the analysis.
We're getting ready to ask your questions to our superb panel. Let me add that the research of our institute is free, downloadable from our website, especially, for instance, a recently published book on the economics of land degradation, published by Springer Publishers, is freely downloadable. It gives all the details. There's a lot more to say, for instance, on that, what Oliver just said. For instance, a more CO2-rich atmosphere lets the crops grow faster and better. So you have to take this out in order to assess how did the land degrade. Of course, climate change with its which is weather shocks and heat stress, on the other hand, reduces productivity. So we are talking about a complex relationship here that goes beyond our presentations. Colleagues in the audience, I suggest we take about half an hour at most for questions and answers between you and the panel, so that maybe some of you then can take time to have some individual interactions with panelists, arrange interviews or whatever, have a follow-up detailed question which would go sort of beyond the general interest. So feel encouraged to challenge our panelists, and I'm ready to take your questions or comments. Yes, and please introduce yourself, and here's a microphone which comes into your hand.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Emmanuel Mwamba from Malawi. I'm a journalist and a communicator for Civil Society Agriculture Network. I have worked in the media for some time, but I just wanted to find out to what are your experiences in the relationship between scientists and the journalists in your everyday work, because where I come from, that relationship seems not to be so much cordial. I don't know why, but I think there's a gap somewhere.
Okay, let's collect a little bit, and next please. Yep. Let's go into the middle and then back and come forward.
Wilhelm Schwerin from Germany. We talked a lot about the research done here. The question I have is, how do you transmit the results of these researches? And how is it done then in Africa, whether on the east or west coast?
Good. There was one all the way in the back.
I'm Katia from the University of Bonn. Since we're talking about sustainable solutions for global agriculture, I would like to know if we're using a working concept of sustainability.
Okay. Working concept of sustainability. Back to basics. There was a hand up right here in the middle.
Yeah, hi there. Hello. Yeah, hi, I'm Gerald from New Zealand. The panels talk a lot about sustainability from an environmental perspective. I'm just wondering about it from an economic perspective. And my question is just around the role of subsidies and what the panel, sorry, does the panel think that it's sustainable for agricultural countries to have subsidies over the long term?
Okay, next right here. Then we let the panel talk and then come back for a second round.
It is a totally hot question.
Welcome.
It's about climate change. In the Climate Change Convention, it's mentioned that food production, so we have to aware about food production. I thought in the debate and the proposal it was about food production and distribution. Why the name of distribution is not in the convention, and because I thought FAO had the question of the FAO was food production, and that you have to distribute it, and also that has an effect about on climate change.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I see there are lots of more hands up. So let's try to be brief with our responses. Justice, would you like to take on the first one?
Yes. Okay, so the first one is on relationship between scientists and journalists. So it's true, I also experienced it from my working in Africa. It appears it does not exist. So you only see journalists going to like launching of new projects. So when scientists have developed a new technology and they are trying to promote it, that's where the scientists come in. So that's what I mentioned in my presentation. There are several platforms where they try to bring stakeholders together, and we always forget about those who will disseminate the information. So we have to try to involve the journalists in the platforms that we are creating. Then secondly, the second person mentioned about how to transmit the results of our research. So at ZEF, you can see from the board behind Professor we do transdisciplinary research, which basically means we involve the farmers or the stakeholders in our research. So this innovation contest I talk about, we actually did it together with some stakeholders who we hope that they take up the initiative and try to do it later, or after our research, we also try to communicate our results to the farmers. So that's one of our basic working approach at ZEF, this transdisciplinary research.
Brigitte, could you also talk a bit about transmission of research results? We shouldn't just look at our institute, but in general, what approaches? You are very much into that.
Yes, it's depending.
Could you switch on mics?
Yes, it depends what is the target group. Under the scientific community, it's usual to transmit the results in scientific journals. But to transmit research results via other targets group, experts in agriculture or farmers, we have a cooperation between several platforms like cross-border research and development platforms between several EU countries, and they are doing this job. And we have some project where we involved, for example, journalists in our research groups to have another way of transfer of results of researchers.
Katia, will you take on the question of
I was planning to respond to two other questions on the role of subsidies in UNFCCC.
You're welcome.
Okay, let me start with
but
them.
On subsidies, I also want to hear Ignace.
Okay. Then, first of all, about the role of subsidies, and this is an issue which is quite intensively debated in UNFCCC context, but not necessarily specifically for agriculture. And then from the perspective of economic theories, subsidies are very important in order to introduce step change in the way industry is working and the products are produced and distributed and so on and so on. But it's also well known that in longer term, maintaining of the subsidies leads to distortions of the market and to reducing its efficiency. So if you put it black and white, then it's very clear that in theory, subsidies should not be maintained in longer term. But the reality is that, in particular for agriculture, such subsidies are never applied solely for the purposes of agriculture as such. They are also linked with the broader social objectives such as rural development and employment. And from this point of view, taking decisions on how long to maintain the subsidies and what level is usually quite a complex issue. And in a way, it's linked to the broader question of sustainable development. Because when we speak about sustainable development, and I cannot bring you any new definition here, we look at, in a balanced way, at the three pillars of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental perspective. And this is what makes the issue of subsidies very complex. But this is definitely one of the policy tools that is extensively used also to achieve, in some cases, climate change objectives. And then there was another UNFCCC specific question on the food production and distribution. Of course, both perspectives are very important, but climate change does not necessarily deal with absolutely all aspects of agriculture. The aspect which is extremely important from climate change perspective is the food production and productivity, because essentially enhancing efficiency and productivity is one of these magic solutions that in many cases helps to deal with both aspects of climate change, mitigation and adaptation. And it allows to deliver the same level of output, even a higher output, which is needed in view of the growing population, at the lower level of input and lower level of emissions. So productivity is extremely important. Then in terms of distribution, I think it's a more of issue of FAO, with which we are cooperating very closely, and also an issue of WTO. Issues of global trade have been pretty high in negotiations of climate change in its early years, back in 90s. During negotiations of the Paris Agreement, these issues have not been addressed at all, for good or bad. But I think that the WTO is really the organization that is addressing these issues in a more effective and holistic way. Yeah, and that's it, probably.
Thank you. Ignace, a word on subsidies. The question came from New Zealand, which dropped them all at some point. Your comment, please.
Yeah, that was my first point. Another surprise that a friend from New Zealand in a European environment brings up the topic of subsidies. Now, this was, I think, a strong statement that Katia just made on the issue of subsidies. Perhaps 2 points to add. What I observe now in the global level of farmer representatives and farmer organizations, that is that first, that everybody agrees that the important thing is that markets must operate, markets must function. So there are a number of dangers then for which markets cannot function. It's bad government, it's bad infrastructure, but farmer organizations do consider that industrial concentration and monopolies are a bigger danger for markets than subsidies. That is the reality of the current world. So let's be realistic on that. The biggest danger comes from monopolies, from agro-industries that are too strong and control markets control every aspect of marketing. So not only the processing, the trading, the transport, everything that this needs. That's a bigger danger. And there have been excellent research in the United States. I thought it was Michigan State University on this agro-industrial concentrations with coefficients in markets and so on. It's important to go on and look at that. The second point is that look, Zambia National Farmers Union, if they see the maize prices in their own country and a disaster in maize production, and they want to relaunch productivity and maize production in their own country, and they have to face cheap imports from countries where maize is produced in a very industrialized way. And so there is some feeling that, okay, you cannot do without border control. We cannot have a bit the topic that you introduced. You cannot have a relaunch. You cannot have innovation. You cannot have improvement of family farming production. You cannot change that structure if you have to face the cheap imports of vegetable oil, the cheap imports of bulk produced cereals. So it makes sense to think about border control, to think about subsidies, to think about market control in that way. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let me add a few words on how does research that is interested in impact disseminate information. An example is the work which Oliver briefly touched on. So after 5 years of hard work on research and producing a big fat book which weighs about 2 kilos, then what? That's not how we approach it. We communicate in the process of research. Of course, we did on this work a press conference in Berlin. Klaus Töpfer and I, with my colleagues, were there. There were about 20 journalists who wrote beautiful articles. That's critical, that your profession picks up new and interesting work. But we also go then back to the 12 countries where we did that work and do briefings there. And critically nowadays, all this material, brief, simple policy briefs for the general public and the academic work is on the website. And that big fat book volume has by now been downloaded more than 40,000 times. So we use the web. And the downloads mostly come from communities in middle-income countries, not only from here. So that's the way we approach it. We are interested to optimize that with your support. Let's do another round of questions and comments. Let me start this time on that side, please. And we walk down there. I will stop at some point if I don't see a single female hand going up. Go ahead, you have a chance.
My name is Ignace Coussement. I'm a journalist from Burkina Faso. The panel gave many solutions to make agriculture more sustainable. But don't you think sustainable agriculture begins by sustainable consumption? Because from what I know is most of the time the way you are consuming agricultural product has an impact on the production system. Mr. Oliver said that we need now intelligent farmers. Don't you think we need first intelligent consumers?
Good point. Oliver, you're challenged. Later on, please. Next here in this quarter. Yes, 1, 2. I'd like to encourage asking brief and hard questions like this. Go ahead.
My name is Susuma, a journalist from Tanzania, East Africa. Some of the presenters talked of the availability of smartphone as the way to communicate with farmers. To my opinion, I see this would be the good way in 10 years to come, because now in take an example in Tanzania. The reality is that a smartphone is owned by a few people in rural areas, and farmers, most of farmers who are really in farming activities, at least adult people who don't own smartphone. And we have also, we know that a smartphone which we are using in Tanzania, I can say in Africa, they don't last long with power. So most of farmers, they are still using this, I can say, old-fashioned phone, which can last long with power. So my suggestion is that maybe we have to think of looking to the best way of using this old-fashioned phone instead of rushing into this smartphone.
Good, excellent. There was a hand up right here, and then we come there.
Nico from Zurich, South Africa. There were many complaints about the lack of attention to agriculture at the COP gathering in Paris. Considering the importance of agriculture in climate change, why was that? Is it because of ignorance, or what can the reason be?
Okay, please pass across. Yep.
My name is Leuven.
Yeah.
From Belgium. I have a question for Mr. Coussement. Right at the beginning, you said that young farmers need to be aware that, well, small farms need to be aware that they are competing in the same markets as major farms. Do you think that's a reality, and if not, how could they be supported? Because it seems to me kind of hard for a smallholder farm to compete with major industrialized farms.
Okay. Right there, next.
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
I'm Mika from Finland. When we had a question about subsidies from New Zealand, we need a question from Finland too, of course. So, I just would like to say that perhaps we still have to make a difference or distinguish between so-called green box subsidies, which is also accepted in the WTO, and other kinds of subsidies. But has there been a kind of investigations globally where you can compare green box subsidies, where you can make an agreement with farmers, we want you to do this and that, and you will have a subsidy for it because of a better environment or to reduce climate changing, or by making up laws. Because in Finland we have a program for the environment, and the farmers will get some subsidies. It's voluntarily. At the other hand, for instance, in Denmark, you made up some laws under the former government, and now the new government is taking them away. What is bringing better results?
Okay. Please down the line there. And then I have two more, and then we stop.
Good morning. My name is Friday Kirui from Zambia. I have two questions. The first one is on the intensification of usage of fertilizers and pesticides. Seemingly, there is this push in Africa, particularly in Zambia, that our farmers don't use smart fertilizers, and so they should use smart fertilizers for improved production. But the involvement of the big corporates in the agribusiness sector is making people skeptical as to what their agenda really is. Maybe the question is to the UNFCCC. Isn't this, don't you see this as a danger to climate change mitigation, considering that agriculture has been identified as one key sector for mitigation in climate change matters? Secondly, is the issue of the youths. Youths before saw agriculture as a debt industry just for the illiterate, and they never got involved. But now when they see agriculture as a business that they should engage in, there is climate change hovering over their heads, especially where we come from in Africa. It's over 60% of our farmers rely on rainfall for production, and they see it as a risk business to get into. What should be done to entice young people to get into agriculture and meet the food requirement of the world population expected to reach 9 billion by 2050?
Okay. All the way to the back and then back to the front.
Chuck Zimmerman from the United States. I don't think I heard it other than just the term. What is your definition of an industrial farm?
Okay. And first line, first row, please. You're last.
My name is Joseph. I'm from Accra, Ghana. Any of you can take this question, but and it's a broad one. This discussion about sustainability has been ongoing for some time now. Some of these suggestions you're making today, they've come up before. As people who are doing all this research and all of that, do you get a sense policymakers are really listening to you and implementing some of the suggestions that you're making? Or probably you're getting frustrated because you repeated them over and over and no one is listening?
Okay. Your level of frustration was the question. They don't look so frustrated to me. You're last.
Yeah, excuse me, Mark Moore from the United States, and I'd like to actually kind of a tail end to that question as well. I know in the developed countries, the issue of sustainability has a much different, definition than in developed. I mean, when we're talking in the developing countries, Germany, the United States, etc., being able to do green programs and catch crops and things like that, that sounds great. But in a developed country, when you're basically, the farmers are trying to make enough to survive, it has an entirely different ring to it. How do you get that message of sustainability across to especially the developed countries when it's more of a survival mode as opposed to, okay, I'm going to increase my production 30% or 10%.
Mm-hmm. Great set of questions. Colleagues, the panel will not be able to really belabor all points carefully. I would like to close the meeting on time, if not earlier. But I would like to go through the panel and you pick and choose. I ask you to stay in the room so that frustrated members of the audience can approach you, because I don't want to have anyone leave unhappy from this meeting. Let me just start with you, Oliver, and we come all the way through. And don't try to address more than 2 of the 9 questions or comments at most, or pick one, or say, I talk later. Go ahead, Oliver.
Right. I'll address the question of intelligent consumption. I think sophisticated technologies in production and farming systems and production systems is not enough. Is not enough to address some of the key challenges of. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I was saying that sophisticated and advanced technologies in production systems is not enough to address some of the key challenges that we are talking about in the sustainable development context. And in this case, then, we mean that there is need to address also consumption aspect, and you're right on that. We need intelligent consumption. There is a new move now into not maximum consumption per se, but more optimal consumption, which is a good concept in which the consumers and the consumers of different products, are taught into aspects of reducing waste, reducing, post-harvest losses for producers as well, and so forth. So there is need to address these aspects of food waste, and this is majorly an issue perhaps in developed countries or industrialized countries, much more than, of course, in the surviving sort of production countries that somebody already mentioned about. So you're right on that. The other thing that I would like to mention is on this issue of subsidy, and the question, somebody from Zambia mentioned this. My comment about fertilizer use, especially in developing countries, and Justice mentioned this already, is that the level of the level of fertilizer usage in developing countries is way, way below the average. What is happening, and from the economics of land degradation perspective, is what we call resource mining. What farmers and people are doing are producing from the soil and never replenishing the soil. They are never giving soil enough time to regenerate. They are never giving any nutrients to the soil. So the harvest from this season, they will take the grains, the remaining stuff is given to the livestock, so there is nothing left in the soil to regenerate. And therefore, fertilizer will play a critical role in helping to improve the soil conditions. But of course, then we have to be careful about the amount of fertilizer that we are using. The current average for some of the sub-Saharan African countries is 9 kilograms per hectare, while the recommended levels will be close to about 120 kilograms. So we are way below in terms of the application, and not only just application. The way we are taking much more than we are putting back into the soil. So you find the soils are completely depleted, and after a few years, if you put any seed of maize or any seed, or any grain of wheat or whatever, you simply get just that size of a crop instead of the normal average size like that. Thank you.
A word on sustainable consumption. The German government made a cabinet decision to release a policy statement on sustainable consumption 2 months ago. It's an easy to read 15-page document. I suggest you take a look at it. What's more exciting is that the current debate on the future research agenda of this country has sustainable consumption as one research issue, because your question was very appropriate. We don't know how. We don't know how to change consumption habits. It's a science and research and behavioral issue. Justice.
Okay. So I will briefly address the question on smartphones. So you're right, the smartphones are mainly used by developed country farmers or large-scale farmers in Africa, but I don't agree with the view that we have to wait for 10 years for farmers in Africa, certain African countries, to use it. So the basic phones they have are also being used. So the smart farming involves all kinds of phone. So the transmission of market information or weather information, for example, in Ghana, there's a lot of projects promoting the use of mobile phones to transmit market information and weather information. So the farmers, they are not literate, they cannot use it to maybe monitor their harvest or the pests and diseases, but they also have some uses of the simple phones they have.
Yes, I come back to your question, the intelligent and sustainable consumption, and I think that since 10 years in the EU, we have approach farm-to-fork approach, and in this approach, farmers has to see all consumer demands, and one of the consumer demand is now in the last years animal welfare, protection of environment, and so on. But how to find a way to invest in such consumer demand, it's very difficult. And since 2 years, we have an initiative from the retailer to give money to the animal farmers that they can invest in more animal welfare programs and projects in their housing, in the kind of producing animals. And I think it's one way of communication between all parties in the value chain, and to show that there is a responsibility of the farmer, but also of the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Katia. Want to come
show
back?
Something.
Yeah, please.
If I manage.
Nothing but a good image.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to respond to two questions. The first is on the lack of attention to agriculture at the COP in Paris, and then the frustration about implementing different suggestions. On the first question, there are perhaps two reasons for this, I would call it rather perception than maybe a fact. The first reason is that with one single exception of article on forests, discussions on the Paris Agreement did not focus on individual sectors. This is the first reason. And the second reason that arguably agriculture is one of the most complex sectors in the UNFCCC context, where the issues of climate change, social and economic development, and issues of international trade are linked in a very complex way, which makes the issue of addressing agriculture in climate change context extremely difficult and complicated. Nevertheless, agriculture is still one of the sectors that is under consideration in a broader UNFCCC context. And in this slide, I wanted to show you how exactly agriculture has been dealt with in the UNFCCC process in the context of the subsidiary body for scientific and technology advice, essentially approaching agriculture from scientific and technological perspective. And parties have been engaged since 2013 in a number of activities looking at agriculture from different angles, trying to come up with a comprehensive understanding of how this complex sector could be addressed in climate change, from climate change perspective. But I wanted to highlight that in addition to negotiations of the Paris Agreement, what we have seen in Paris is also discussion on the ongoing action, or the so-called action agenda, where representatives of the governments, of the private sector, of the civil society outlined their vision and concrete examples of the action that they have taken in concrete they call it thematic areas or sectors, and agriculture was among these sectors. And further information is available on the web how agriculture was presented, again from an action point of view, not necessarily from negotiation point of view. I have highlighted in my presentation then that in their submissions of their actions on pledges under the Paris Agreement, essentially more than 70% of the countries included agriculture as one of their action area, which gives a lot of confidence that the issue is among the top priority issues in climate change context of individual governments, and it will not be forgotten. Then I have also, with my colleagues, prepared this summary, which highlights, on the one hand, from the discussion in Paris, what are some of the concrete sustainable solutions in agriculture, and on the other hand, how these sustainable solutions have been illustrated through concrete actions or activities in the context of the so-called nationally determined contributions by parties. These are just illustrative examples, but my point is that there is no room for frustration. Rather, there are a lot of opportunities of identifying of best practices in terms of different policy solutions, and options and opportunities to scale up these best practices and to replicate them where this is possible and necessary. And again, this is an area where I think your audience can play a huge role in disseminating information of these best practices, identifying success stories, and making them as a benchmark for the next steps in finding sustainable solutions in agriculture.
Great. Thank you. Ignace.
If you allow me, one short point on the other round of questions was that we are strongly supportive of what we call embedded journalism, and that term is an important one. It's important to have journalism working within farmer organizations. The terms come from the military, I know, but it's a good term. We're strongly in support of that. We are strongly in support also, AgriCord, in supporting farmer organizations to participate in major discussions on policy like the COP Paris and these climate discussions. But as for the trade issues, it's an enormous problem. The door is open. All major institutions, international institutions, are very open, are very willing, there's no objection at all, but it's very difficult for us, one, to find finance to allow this participation, but also to be prepared for that. You know, this framework you have brought on in the beginning of the meeting is very comprehensive. It's a difficult topic, even for governments who negotiate. So for farmers to be with their governments, to negotiate that stuff, it's not an easy thing. So we think about longer processes and preparation of farmer organizations. It costs huge amounts of money to do that. The issue of industrial family farming versus industrial farming, it's a very tricky one. I think we all realize that there is a continuum between what we call family farming, that is where the farmer, the professional, controls all factors of production. That's the one side. And on the other side, where agricultural production is going on and organized not by a farmer but by one of the owners of the production factors, by the processor, by the trader, by the bank, that's the other end of the continuum, and in between you have different possibilities. The fact is that we do face, and that's a bit my answer to the Belgian question, we are supporting the organizations of family farmers. That's very clear, even if we do not have an obvious clear-cut definition of family farming. It are farmers that are in control of their factors of production, of the land, of the finance, of the labor that is engaged on that production, and we stick to that. The reality is, and that was my point, that young farmers must realize that their setting and what their organization represents, it's really not the only thing that is happening in their immediate markets and in their immediate economic environment. They have to deal with same products produced in other settings by others who are controlling markets. There are plenty of examples in developing countries where irrigation schemes are partly mise en valeur, operated by smallholders, by family farmers, and the same irrigated water and land is used by excellent producers who control an external market and have the scheme of producing the quality that is needed for these external markets. The reality there for family farmers is to find a way to cope with that, either to join them, to be part of outgrower scheme, to take the benefit of their access to markets and try to control that. Or, and that is the reality we have to face, or just to make sure that you can address with your products local markets and be very proactive in that too, and make sure that you don't simply produce any tomato or any bean or any vegetable in general, but a vegetable that goes to a particular market. That's the reality you have to face. And there's always this thing going on, even for bulk production like sugarcane in the Southern African region. There are lots of smallholder family farmer producers of sugarcane who have excellent arrangements with emerging farmers and with bigger farmers that can have access to the sugar plant and that arrange for transport and so on. That's a real reality for farmers, and that's what I could answer. Thank you.
Colleagues, I will not aim to do a summary, but we'll in closing speak to two topics which you brought up. One is sustainability, what concept? And isn't there a different one for the rich and the poor? Yes, there is. We will not resolve this debate by dictating definitions of this is to be the sustainability definition, but by societal discourse and debate. And technically speaking, the key issue is how much nature capital versus man-made capital substitution do you permit? So exchanging one against the other. That is an issue of debate. Who would blame the farmer in Uganda, who we have studied, who is letting his soil degrade in order to pay the school fee for his daughter? That is substitution between nature capital and man-made capital. I personally am of the opinion, and that's a value judgment, the rich should not be permitted to substitute nature capital for man-made capital. The poor should. Let me leave you with that thought on sustainability. Frustration. I think your community of the media community in the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists should be, and probably are, very excited about what's currently happening around world agriculture. If you look around the world, say China, last year's reform on land rights, creating a lot of stimulus, of new stimulus, and accelerating the transformation of agriculture in productive ways, which Ignace has talked about. If you look at India, the Modi government has finally come around to do something for farmers, although I am skeptical about their science and technology policy. But excitement happening there, re-initiating agricultural development strategies for poor smallholders. If you look at Africa, the government expenditures on African agricultural sector have added at least about 50% since the last 1.5 decades. So turning point has been reached, and more attention to agriculture investment, public investment is happening, and that is drawing also private investment. If you look at Europe, October 13, the European Commission will launch a new strategy paper on food security 2030, which will address many of the issues which you have raised today from our panel and in the audience. Let's hold our breath what will come out of the US elections and what type of agriculture and international policy we will see from there. So I will not comment on that one. However, we have not really touched on a very controversial topic, and that is trade. I think it was briefly mentioned once or twice. I cannot imagine a sustainable world agriculture around which not more trade is happening. A world agriculture that withdraws to national and local strategies will create lots of unsustainable situations, because it would neglect the strengths, the locational strengths, the so-called comparative advantages. So I think for sustainability in agriculture and food, we need a world that has sound rule-based trade, in which trade agreements, as they are currently on the table between Europe and North America and around the Pacific, are carefully scrutinized but not rejected right away because they deal with trade. So with this thought and a note of thanks to our splendid panel, I would like to ask you to give them an applause. Thank you very much.